Good evening and welcome to Congregation Shered Zedek for our annual Yom Hashoah commemoration with the reading of Megillat Hashoah, the scroll of the Shoah. My name is Rabbi Matthew Leibel, and it is my honor to be presiding over this evening's event. Tonight is a powerful evening, an evening that brings together members of our Jewish community in Winnipeg, but also our friends in our Interfaith community, people from other religious and cultural communities in our city. Last year, shortly after the beginning of our first lockdown and the onset of this pandemic, we were forced to cancel the event for the first time since we started in 2007. This year, we are happy to be back, although it is in a way. We look forward to next year, hopefully, when we can all be together again in the pews of our fair congregation and synagogue. While we look forward to that, we knew we could not skip this event again. Yasher Koach to all of the readers who will be joining us this evening bravely on Zoom, embracing the power of technology. This year we've gone virtual. It's a different look for what has been a very familiar evening. And this is a reminder that as time passes, the way we tell stories, even our serious stories, the way we tell stories may have to change. But that doesn't mean we stop telling the stories. No, quite the opposite. Even as times change, even as the way we tell our stories changes, we must press on. The story must live on, even if we have to adapt. I'd like to pause and recognize before we continue that Congregation Shered Zedek is located on ancestral lands, on Treaty 1 territory. The Red River Valley is also the birthplace of the Métis. We acknowledge the water in our city is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. Now, if you know me, you know I'm someone who loves to laugh. But I also know, as it says in the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a time to laugh and a time to cry. Tonight is one of those nights where we cry. We tell a story that is truly painful to tell and to relive. But that is exactly why we tell it. Today marks with sunset the conclusion of Yom Hashoah. Next week in Israel, there will be 2 days celebrating different events back to back. First, Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Remembrance Day, and then Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. There's a teaching in having these celebrations, these commemorations back to back, that the Jewish way is first we look back, we remember, we mourn, and then we celebrate. We look back, even when we look back at death, and then we go forward in life. Thank you again to our readers and to all of you for joining us as the story lives on. To introduce Megillat Hashoah, the Shoah Memorial Scroll, it's my honor to welcome Bel Jarniewski, Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada.
Good evening. The notion of solitude is one that is foreign to Judaism. We gather together to mark holidays and simchas, as well as to mourn and to comfort the bereaved. This past year, we have learned to mark our holidays, our joys, and our sorrows in a very different way. Tonight, we're grateful for the technology that allows us to commemorate Yom HaShoah in this meaningful way. Let's hope that next year we'll once again be able to greet each other with smiles, handshakes, and who knows, even hugs. Since 1953, the 27th of Nisan has been marked as a day for observing with solemn ceremony the most terrible tragedy to befall our people. With the creation of the scroll of Megillat HaShoah, we are now able to observe Yom HaShoah together through a meaningful and unifying ritual. Historically, Jewish tragedies have been marked in three ways: by public fast days, by designated periods of mourning on the Jewish calendar, and by the composition of Megillot, scrolls. For instance, on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the month of Av, we read Megillat Eicha, the Scroll of Lamentations, an intricate set of dirges and descriptions of Jerusalem under siege and of the destruction of the first temple. The only specific religious content we have in the secular ceremonies marking Yom HaShoah is the special El Malei Rachamim memorial prayer for the 6 million. But unless we firmly anchor Yom HaShoah in religious ritual, how can we be certain that we will properly remember the Shoah 50 or even 100 years from now, when there will be no more survivors or even children of survivors left to ensure that the date is commemorated? Out of these concerns, several years ago, a Toronto survivor and philanthropist, Alex Eisen, approached Rabbi David Golinkin of the Jerusalem-based Schechter Institute on Kol Nidre night with the idea of creating a scroll that would be read annually around the world. The funds for the project were raised in Toronto. An academic committee was set up in Israel, including scholars from various fields, from Midrash to liturgy to Shoah, Bible, Talmud, and Halakha. Dr. Avid Dor Shinan, an expert in Midrash and Hebrew liturgy, wrote the first draft in 6 hours. And after several rewrites, the committee approved the final version. The chapters that you will hear in Hebrew tonight are chanted to the same beautiful and mournful trope that is used for Eicha, Lamentations. Now at Sher Zedek, we do something rather special and perhaps even unique with our interfaith reading of the scroll. For the Shoah is not only an unprecedented tragedy for the Jewish people, we must remember it as an unprecedented tragedy and an utter failure of humanity. If we are ever to confront the ongoing and sadly increasing issues of bigotry, racism, and anti-Semitism, we must view the Shoah as a theological and historical touchstone and a point of reorientation. More than at any time since 1945, the very historical narrative of the Shoah is being threatened by revisionists. Vicious anti-Semitic invective, vandalism, and violence against Jews has reached a level we have not seen since 1945. And COVID has brought with it ugly anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. In Canada, we've seen a dramatic and continued rise in anti-Semitic incidents. Unfortunately, we live in an era in which some politicians have allowed anti-Semitism to go mainstream. The othering of minorities has been encouraged rather than categorically denounced. We are grateful to share this evening with dear friends from many faiths who have joined us to make the evening all the more meaningful with their participation. We also acknowledge our gratitude to the many friends who have expressed their solidarity through these difficult times.
Megillat HaShoah, the scroll of the Shoah, is the centerpiece of tonight's service. However, in Jewish tradition, we have other ways of evoking emotion, which is what tonight is all about. That's why we began with the sounding of the shofar. In ancient times, it heralded new months or important events, or was a battle cry. It stirs our soul, even tonight, and we long to hear it again in person. In addition to reading from the scroll in both English and the chanting in Hebrew, We'll be lighting candles in commemoration of those we have lost. And we will have musical selections that will pace the evening and set the tone. We turn now to our first musical selection, Deine weiße Stern, Under Your White Stars, a Yiddish song composed in the Vilna Ghetto, performed for us this evening by Chazan Ari Litvak of Bet-El in Mexico City.
Unter deine weiße Stern streckt zu mir deine weiße Hand. Meine Wörter sind Tränen, will ruhen in dein Hand. Sehr ist dunkel, sehr finkel, in mein Keller dicken Bild, und ich hab gar nicht kein Winkel, sich zu schenken dir zurück. Und ich hab gar nicht kein Winkel, sich zu schenken dir zurück. Und ich will doch Gott getreuer dir vertreuen mein Vermögen, weil es mangt dir mir auf Feuer und in Feuer meine Tag, nur in Keller nur Lecher, wenn die mörderische Ruhe läuf ich Hecher, über Dächer, und ich such, wo bist du, läuf ich Hecher, über Dächer, und ich such, wo bist du. Nehmen Jogen mich Meschune, Treppen Häufen mit Gebäude, hen ich angeblasene Strune, und ich sing zu dir als euch. Unter deine weiße Stern streckt zu mir deine weiße Hand. Meine Wörter sind Tränen, willen ruhen in dein Hand. Meine Wörter sind Tränen, willen ruhen in dein Hand.
Although several Megillat Hashoah have been created by different scribes around the world, Winnipeg resident, the late Irma Penn, Zichrona Livracha, of blessed memory, crafted a one-of-a-kind scroll we will use this evening. In addition to adhering to the strict style of Hebrew calligraphy used in writing the content of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, Irma included a beautifully calligraphied English translation alongside the Hebrew text. Viewers, this evening you will be able to follow through the scroll simultaneously as our readers read. The scroll we use this evening was commissioned by the family of the late Ron Myers, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory, in honor of his devotion to community work. And to honor the work of the late Philip Weiss, Zichrono Livracha, of blessed memory, in previous years, physical copies of Megillat Hashoah in booklet form have been made available to everyone as a gift from Philip's daughters, Francie Winograd and Beverly Schwartz. Philip, a concentration camp survivor, came to Canada and became a pioneer Holocaust educator and author, determined that the truth about the past must be preserved and its lessons learned. He was committed to the survival of the Jewish people in their homeland, Israel, and promoted respect for universal human rights. May all who read this scroll this evening be inspired to recognize Philip's devotion to Holocaust education, and most of all, to join in the cause of peace, remembrance, and tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. We look forward to next year when we again can hold the booklet forms of Megillat Hashoah in our hands in these pews. Now we turn to the reading of the scroll with our first Hebrew reader, Rabbi Yosef Ben Harosh of Congregation Adas Yeshurun Herzliya Synagogue here in Winnipeg. This Hebrew reading, using the special Echa Trope melody, follows us from chapter 1 with verses 8 through 19.
אך מה שראה לעם ישראל באירופה הנאצית, אין לו שם, מה שעלתה לבניו ולבנותיו, אי אפשר לפה לפרשו, אין ספר בני אדם, הוגלו מבתיהם, נקראו ממשפחותיהם, הושפלו עד עפר, ושובטו עד מוות, 6 מיליון ברואים בצלם, נחנקו, נשרפו או נורו, נקברו חיים, ומתו ברעב, בצמא ובקור, הפעם פרה המפלצת את פיה, לבלי חוק, בצבחה מקפיאה הדם, וביקשה לעקור את הכל, בלא רחם, יצאה להשמיד, להרוג ולאבד, את העם כולו, מן הבאים בימים, ועד לעוברים, שבימי אמותיהם, רכבות אין ספור, דהרו דחוסות אל המחנות, ועשן הערובות, התאמר אל האלוהים, אך השמיים היו נחושת, והרקיע ברזל, שהקשוק גלגלי הקרונות, התערב בנביחות הכלבים, ואל טריקת דלתות הברזל הצטרף ראש הנעליים המסומרות, כתזמורת ענק דורסנית, החרישו כל אלה את כל הדממה הדקה, אשר בעקה מליבות מתי המעט, חסידי אומות העולם, אשר נגע בהם דבר האלוהים, זכרה להם אלוהים, זאת לטובה. הרבה כבר ראיתי, והרבה עוד אראה, אך מה שנגלה לעיניי שם, לא אוכל לשוב ולראות כל המילים שנבראו ושיתבראו בכל השפות כולן, לא יצליחו לתאר ולו מעט ממה שנגלה לעיניי, ואף זאת עדה לא אוכל לשכוח, ולא יהיה בי הכוח להבין.
This evening, we have 13 English readers to help us get through the Megillat Hashoah. We will also have more readings in Hebrew, as well as I mentioned, musical selections and even a piece of Yiddish poetry. For each of our first 7 English readers, we will follow their selections with the lighting of a candle, each one symbolic of people who perished tragically in the events of the Shoah. Our first English reader is Kevin Chief, Principal of Chief Partnerships Manitoba, Inc. Through Chief Partnerships Manitoba, Inc., Kevin leads a team working to build relationships that strengthen community. Born and raised in Winnipeg's North End, he has considerable public sector and community experience. He was vice president at the Business Council of Manitoba, spent 6 years as a member of the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba, representing Point Douglas, and currently works in the field of education, training, and employment. Kevin and his wife Melanie have 3 young sons, Hayden, Kellen, and Daxton. He is also known as a high-steppin' square dancer as part of the Norman Chief Memorial Dancers. The reader of our first English section, verses 1 through 7 in chapter 1 of Megillat Hashoah, is Mr. Kevin Chief.
Thank you. Chapter 1, in the beginning. So spoke the chronicler. Long is the history of the eternal people, extending for millennia, including good years and bad years, tranquil years and dreadful years. In its own land and in diaspora lands, among the nations, and as a free people, it enjoyed long periods of repose during which it contributed of its endowments of fellow mortals, bestowing upon them the Sabbath and faith in one God, the book of books, and the teachings of the prophets. At times, however, in darkened and difficult days, it struggled under the burdens imposed by vanquishers and subjugators. It was afflicted, body and soul, by religious wars and persecutions, burnings at the stake, and being crowded into ghettos, blood libels and pogroms, expulsions and exiles, degradation and derision. The people had neither serenity nor tranquility, and the monster of Jew hatred again and again threatened to swallow it whole, rose up against it in every generation, attempting to destroy it. Nevertheless, the people gritted its teeth, accepted the heavenly judgment, and, groaning, even at times stretched its neck on the sacrificial altar. Homeless and hunted, it sought a safe haven, a refuge for resting a while until the time of wrath had passed.
I light this first candle in memory of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Shoah. The reading of chapter 1 continues with verses 8 through 19, read for us this evening by Reverend Julie Collins, a retired Anglican priest, currently doing some pastoral work for All Saints Church. Pastoral conversation has always seemed to Reverend Julie an uncovering of the sacred in our midst. Before retirement, she ministered in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, in remote northern communities, and in the inner city. Her work always included organizing training for local ministry. Since retirement, she has volunteered with and for prisoners, people who have FASD, and for people who have intellectual disabilities. Widowed after a long and happy marriage, she is currently happily married to Dr. Paul Hentelef. She is mother to 5 adults, grandmother to 19, and great-grandmother to 3, as well as enjoying Paul's large family.
What befell the people of Israel in Nazi Europe, however, is beyond classification. And what confronted its sons and daughters defies description. Untold numbers were forced out of their homes, torn from their families, trampled in the dust, worked to death. 6 million, created in the divine image, were strangled, cremated, shot, buried alive. They died of starvation, of thirst, and of the cold. This time the monster stretched open its mouth beyond bounds, with a blood-curdling shriek and with stinking breath, and sought to eradicate everything. Without mercy, it set out to destroy, to slaughter, and to lay waste the entire people, from those nearing the end of their days to embryos in their mother's wombs. Countless trains stuffed with human cargo sped to the camps, where from chimneys smoke ascended to God. But the heavens were brass and the firmament iron. The click-clack of box-car wheels blended with the barking of dogs, and the clank of iron doors merged with the stomping of hobnailed boots. Like a gigantic thundering orchestra, all of these sounds silenced the thin, small voice bursting out of the hearts of the precious few, the righteous of the world's nations who had been touched by the word of God. May God recall their deeds in their favor. So much have I seen, and so much have I yet to see. But what was revealed to me there, I never could see again. All the words in the world, created and yet to be created, in every single language, will never be able to describe even a small part of what was displayed before my eyes. And this too do I know. Never will I be able to forget. And never will I have the power to understand.
Thank you to our readers for Chapter 1, Rabbi Yosef Ben-Arosh, Mr. Kevin Chief, and Reverend Julie Collins. I will now have the honor of lighting our second candle in memory of the destroyed communities. We move now to Chapter 2, the first part, which will be read for us by Mr. Bob Silver, president and co-owner of Western Glove Works, co-owner of FPLP, Urban Barn Retail Stores, Auld Phillips, Comark. With a long history of community involvement, Previously chaired community activities by Mr. Silver include chair of the RBC Convention Center, Smart Park at the U of M, United Jewish Appeal of Jewish Federation of Winnipeg, Grow Winnipeg Initiative of the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg, United Way of Winnipeg, Destination Winnipeg. Mr. Silver has served as co-chair of Premier's Economic Advisory Council from its inception, the Millennium Library Foundation, and has also served as Chancellor of the University of Winnipeg. Presently, Mr. Silver is active as the Vice Chair of First Peoples Economic Growth Fund, a board member of Centerport Canada, a board member of Business Council of Manitoba, on the Advisory Council of United Way of Winnipeg, and co-chair of We Day Manitoba. The honors he has received include B'nai B'rith Man of the Year, University of Manitoba Alumnus of the Year, the Order of Manitoba, an honorary degree from Red River Community College, the Business Hall of Fame, Manitoba Chamber of Commerce, and the Jewish National Fund Man of the Year.
From the Journal of a Journey to Another World. I was part of a small delegation of journalists that stole into the ghetto in order to see what was happening behind its walls. I stayed there for 8 hours, during which I aged 10 years. On our way there, we stopped at a church to worship, since it was Sunday. When the last notes of the organ had failed, we listened to the words of the priest. He spoke of suffering and affliction, of love, of compassion, of pity and kindness, and sent us on our way with the blessing, "May God be with you." But when we passed the guardhouses placed in the walls surrounding the ghetto, we were left with the suffering and the affliction then alone. As we entered, a cart was coming towards us, pushed and pulled by 3 men. Bloated corpses were heaped up on it. Their heads were bouncing to a rhythm determined by muddy ruts in the road, as if they were greeting us. For the first time, we met death's partner, famine. It was impossible not to feel its presence in every corner. And it was the force endlessly propelling streams of weakened people through the streets, their faces filled with this despair. Wherever you looked, terrifying sights. A dead body, its face covered by a newspaper, and a man hastily removing its overcoat while digging in its pockets with anticipation. A young girl holding tightly her infant sister who was weeping out of hunger, listlessly, maybe dying, maybe sleeping. An elder crowned with tefillin stretched out a feeble hand, his eyes reflecting the peace he had made with the most dreadful of all. A boy who had tried to smuggle potato skins into the ghetto, surrounded by a group of guards, reveling with coarse laughter as they stripped him before he was beaten to death.
This evening, we light the 3rd candle in memory of the 1.5 million murdered children. Our next English reader, as we continue through chapter 2, is Mr. Rob Berkowitz, Executive Director of the Rady Jewish Community Center. Born and raised in Winnipeg, Rob has served in both nonprofit and corporate sectors in senior roles for close to 25 years. Prior to joining the Rady JCC, he spent 4 years in the role of Director of Development and Gift Planning at the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. Rob previously served as the Executive Director for the Jewish National Fund of Canada, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan region, as well as the Executive Director for Football Manitoba. Rob and his wife, Kristen, have 2 children, Avery and Grayson.
A group of young people was assembled around a bulletin board. One of the announcements, written in Yiddish, drew my attention. It was explained to us that this was an announcement about a concert to be held that very day, a small choir and violinist. Other announcements told about Torah instruction and lectures on current events. Did these have the power, even if monetary, to silence gnawing hunger or to stifle the dread of what the future held? Whence did this nation draw the strength to stare into the eyes of the destroying angel? We also met with members of Judenrat, community leaders whose unfortunates into those whose hands who were entrusted the lives of their brothers and sisters without the power to save them. Once again, they were forced to organize people for a transport, while the motors of the trucks already were roaring in the central square. With shoving and shouting, mothers and their children were forced, along with the elderly holding their canes, the ailing and the crippled and the feeble, into cavernous maws of the trucks, and all their eyes were filled with nightmarish horror. On their way to the nearby train depot, the trucks left behind them a silent scream shrouded in black smoke, and the painful certain knowledge that tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, this scene would be repeated until the ghetto's last breath. The return to the city's main street with its traffic and tumult, crowds and carousing brought me at once from one world to another. A narrow wall and a few gates separated worlds that were so different. What do the dwellers of one world know about their neighbors in the other one? And if I were to tell you, would they listen? And if they were to listen, could they believe? And if they were to believe, would they not attempt to explain or to cleanse their consciences with scores of different and differing rationalizations? And if they were to ask me why all of this befell the Jews, how would I answer?
The 4th candle we light this evening is in memory of the ghetto fighters and the partisans. Thank you again to our readers for Chapter 2, Mr. Robert Silver and Mr. Rob Berkowitz. Before we continue with the next chapter, Chapter 3 in Megillat Hashoah, our scroll of the Shoah, another musical selection, another song in Yiddish, Oifen Pripachik, performed by my partner, Rabbi and Chazan and Ibo Mas of Congregation Shered Zedek. A beautiful, haunting melody that was quite famously used in the movie of Schindler's List, Oifen Pripachik.
Oifen Pripachik brennt a fire und ich du wie's heißt und der Rebellen kleine Kinder lacht dem Aleph Beis und der Rebellen kleine Kinder lacht dem Aleph Beis Gedenke Kinder lacht Gedenke Tayere, was ist lerendo. Sogje noch amol und dake noch amol, come zalepo. Sogje noch amol und dake noch amol, come zalepo. Als it für Kinder lacht, ältere werden, wird ihr allein verstehen, wie viel in die Oisis liegen Tränen und wie viel Gewehen gedenke deire was ist lerendo so che noch amol tage noch amol come zalevo so che noch amol tage noch amol come zalevo.
Thank you, Rabbi. Rabbi Anibo Mas of Congregation Shered Zedek. We continue now with chapter 3 of Megillat Hashoah, which will be read in 3 English sections. The first to be read for us by Rabbi Alan Finkel, the spiritual leader of Temple Shalom, Winnipeg's Reform Jewish congregation. The Holocaust has had a profound influence on Rabbi Finkel's life, as his mother, aunt, and grandparents are survivors who came to Canada in 1948. He is also named after his father's oldest brother, Avrum, who chose to stay in Galicia with his wife and baby daughter and did not survive. Rabbi Finkel has been involved with Holocaust awareness and education programs for many years through the Holocaust Education Center.
The darkness spread over all, written upon a scrap of paper found between 2 wooden beds. Gertrude is my name. There were many Gertrudes in our town, but in this long, cold barracks, there is no Gertrude but me. There is an Anushka here who comes from the Ukraine, and Gittel from Poland, Helen from Germany, and Grazia from Greece, and a continuing long list of those who once were women. What cruel, callous magnets drew us here from all corners of the continent and cast all of us into one mold? Wooden shoes and a dress of coarse fabric, a blanket to cover our body in a cold that knows no mercy, and a tin plate and a spoon that could never hold enough to satisfy the incessant, gnawing hunger. The past is becoming blurred, replaced only by the present, today, right now, this moment, the sewing machine, a portion of foul soup, the lineup where some of us collapse and from which others are plucked away to disappear, accompanied by shrieks and dogs, and no one knows where. The present fills all our existence. About the future, no one speaks, and with difficulty, I remember the past.
This evening, we light the 5th candle in honor of the righteous among the nations. The next section of chapter 3 will be read for us in English by Sensei Tanis Moore. Sensei Moore's interest in Buddhist teachings began in 1999, when Sensei Frederick Ulrich moved to Winnipeg as the new minister of the Manitoba Buddhist Temple. This evolved into her taking a Buddhist name to join the community of Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. That prompted her to begin studying with the Buddhist Churches of America, Jodo Shinshu Center in Berkeley, California. There she became a Tokudo, an assistant minister, sensei, in Kyoto, Japan, in the summer of 2019. Sensei Moore has been involved in interfaith work for several years, and she is honored to take part in the Yom HaShoah Holocaust Memorial Interfaith Service.
Oh, how short-sighted and innocent we were. We rejected the advice to abandon the homeland, to immigrate to the distant East, and we hid ourselves from the sign, "No Jews allowed." Our ears we sealed from hearing the hateful speeches, for they were just words, and what can words really accomplish? With all our might, we wanted to believe that if only we would humble ourselves a short while, the storm would pass and be no more. Even after the night of the burning synagogues, when the streets were covered with shattered glass, we continued hoping for the best, since nothing worse could come to pass, and after all, everyone was cultured there. Alas for the blind fools who did not know what the future held. It was on a Friday night. We were sitting in the salon, and my crippled, wheelchair-bound father, Manfred, was singing along with the choir being broadcast on the radio. Suddenly, the door was broken down, and they entered, black uniforms and shining boots. They shoved Father into an adjoining room, and they commanded us to pack a suitcase within 10 minutes. "Where you are going is safe and sheltered," they said. "Hurry, hurry."
This evening, we light the 6th candle in honor of the State of Israel. The final section of chapter 3 of Megillat Hashoah will be read for us this evening by Dr. Rachel Reeser-Taylor, a professor at St. Boniface University in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. Dr. Reeser-Taylor was raised on a farm outside of Montreal and did all her post-secondary studies in Montreal, a Bachelor of Science in Biology, and a master's and PhD in religious studies with a focus on Christian theology at McGill. She has taught at Queen's University, Bluffton University in Ohio, and here in Winnipeg at the University of Winnipeg and University of Manitoba, and is currently a contract faculty member at Université de St. Boniface. The courses have ranged from Christian theology, Bible to world religions, focusing on such topics as Canada, women, and social issues. Being raised Mennonite in Quebec helped to foster Dr. Reeser-Taylor and her commitment to ecumenical cooperation, which has only grown through contact with colleagues and students in the various faith traditions of the institutions where she has taught and the communities where she has lived. She is now a member of St. Ignatius Parish and Choir and works part-time at the parish school. An exciting part of her Introduction to World Religions courses in Ohio and here in Winnipeg has been the visits to synagogues, mosques, temples, houses of worship of various traditions.
Later, only interrupted images and fragmented sounds, an isolated rifle shot, the vacant stares of the neighbors, the frozen city square, a mother's farewell cry, the filthy truck, the box car with not a breath of fresh air, the long barracks with nothing but wooden beds, and the sour-faced capo. Our hair they shaved when they brought us into the barracks, and in place of the 6-pointed yellow star, they burned a blue number into our arms. And from that moment, only sewing and sewing from morning to night, without rest, day after day, hats, coats, shirts, and trousers appropriate for the shining boots. At first, I still asked why. Why me? Why us? Why now? But I stopped asking. The question is more painful when there is no answer. Tonight, they will take all of us to another location. This is what the capo told us. And she did not add another word, but her face was gloomy. I am writing all of this on scraps of paper. And if a human being should ever find them, perhaps he will have the strength to ask for a reason why there was no
Our seventh and final candle we light this evening is in memory of the millions of other victims of the Nazis and their collaborators, murdered for racial and ideological reasons, among them the Roma, the mentally and physically challenged, gay men, political prisoners, and Poles and other Slavs, dissenting clergy, blacks, and Soviet prisoners of war. We pause our reading of the Megillah for now and another interlude. This, the reading of a powerful piece of Yiddish poetry, read for us by Edith Kimmelman. Holocaust survivor, educator, and school administrator, Edith was born in Rona, Poland, the adored only child. Her tranquil life came to an abrupt halt in June of 1941 when German troops invaded the small community where she had spent the first 6.5 years of her life. Her nightmarish experiences began shortly after the invasion. She experienced the trauma of watching her home being looted, the complicity and betrayal of neighbors and friends, the shooting death of her father, the murder of her Jewish neighbors, and eventually the death of her mother because of a severe beating. All of this left her with deep and indelible scars, as well as a pronounced fear of the future. Her years in hiding, bereft of family, her only possessions the clothes she wore, imprinted a fear of poverty and displacement, terrified she would lose her loved ones. The only treasure she was able to salvage and safeguard was the memory of the unconditional love her family had provided and their reverence for education. Liberated in the spring of 1944, she finally found a safe haven in Canada in June of 1949. Edith began to pursue higher education as a mature student, obtaining a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Winnipeg and teacher certification from the University of Manitoba. She also pursued pre-master's courses at the U of M and studied at summer institutes in Israel, Bar Ilan, and the Hebrew University, in the United States at Columbia, and in the United Kingdom at Oxford. Her focus has been twofold. First, to transmit to students the value of freedom and the consequences of war and hatred. And second, to inspire the resilience of surviving impossible conditions while finding the courage to strive and achieve a better life. Edith Kimmelman is a mother and grandmother and has generously shared her story with students and adults for many years. Tonight, she reads for us in Yiddish the poem, "We Are the Witnesses," the congregation.
Das Lied "Wir seien die Edes" kommt von Buch "At viele in der Nacht". "At viele in der Nacht" ist geschrieben von der Poetin Miriam Knappheis. Miriam Knappheis hat einmal gewohnt in Winnipeg, Zeit. Ich will anheben mit dem Lied jetzt. Wir seien die Edes. Wir seien die Edes von Gräueltat und Schritte, die rechtlich von Umkunft verpeinigten Dorf. Wir kommen von Polen, von Russland, von Lite. Wir haben den Bogen gesehen in War. Es ducht sich, wir seien wie andere Menschen. Der Ansog von Tag, wir begrüßen mit Fried. Wir weinen, wir lachen, wir schelten. Wir benchen, nur der Sekon uns ständig verklebt. Die Augen begleiten in Sikoren Gerehen. Der Euer erzählt jeden einzigen Tod. In schlaflose Nacht kehrt der Jammer geschrien und die vergliederte Times zu Gott. Es schreckt uns die Stillkeit, es bringt der Sikoren uns in der Stillkeit die Krächzen von Pein. Es seien und es werden vergehen viel Jahre. Wir werden wie andere Märchen nicht sein. Weil wir haben nicht Engel gekuscht, deute Lied. Und viel noch als sehr frostigen Tag. Wir können den Bund nicht zerbinden, zerknicken. Wir sind gebunden mit Frost und mit Flamme. Wir haben gefeiert, Flammen geschlungen, es zerbrennt unser Leib, versandt unser Blut. Wir tragen dem Rauch noch Herz in die Lungen, die Wurzeln verdammt von Frieden und inmitten von Frieden und zerspielten Gelächter, bitte der Mann tut sich ja wund. Die Frieden werden trunken, zwei hatten sich Schwerter, das Gemüt und darum ein Eiskörper. Unser Schweigen ist schwerer, Gelächter ist härter, mit Unsterne deckenden Unruhe, die Schrei. Weil in Nacht brechen Mörder aus von Gelächter, verwandeln und Schlaf nach Lübeck. Wir stammen von Polen, Russland, von Lippe und durchgemacht alles, was durch nicht war. Wir seien die Edels von Gräuelstadt und Schritte, der Rest der
Thank you to Edith Kimmelman for the reading of that Yiddish poem. We return to Megillat Hashoah, the reading from the scroll, and continue with chapter 4, which will be read for us in two English sections. The first by Mr. Richard Yaffe, the chair of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba. Richard was born and educated in Winnipeg. He's a graduate of the public school system in the North End and of the I.L. Peretz Folk School Evening School. Richard graduated from the University of Manitoba with a Bachelor of Arts in 1976 and received his law degree from the U of M in 1979. He has practiced law for 40 years and is a partner at Thompson Dorfman Sweatman LLP, where he practices securities law and corporate and commercial law. Richard is nationally recognized by best lawyers in the areas of both corporate law and securities law and was named Winnipeg Securities Law Lawyer of the Year in 2017 and 2019. Richard is the chair of the board of the Jewish Foundation of Manitoba and is well known in Winnipeg as a cantor, vocalist, and choral conductor. He has been a featured performer at the Mamaloshin Yiddish Festival of Arts and Culture. Richard chaired the Board of Governors of the Winnipeg Art Gallery from 1998 to 2005, and now chairs the Winnipeg Art Gallery Foundation and the Legacy Endowment Campaign for the WAG's new Inuit Art Center. He is also a board member of Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre and a national board member of the Canadian Friends of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem.
Confronting the Abyss. The last words of Yaakov David ben Yoel Tzvi Halevi. 4 times was I born, and once already have I died. My first birth was accompanied by the joyful voices of my parents and my 8 brothers and sisters when I came into the world with the help of God, may he be blessed, 25 years ago. I was born 3 other times over the past 10 years, during which time I also died once. After that death, no death could ever frighten me. The second time, I was born on the night of the selection, when they gathered us, all the males in town, to the central square. The stars had disappeared and only the yellow patches flickered in the darkness. We were told to form a long line and strip to the waist. One by one, we passed by the light of a dim oil lamp near a devil dressed in black, who with a wave of a hand directed to the left or to the right. At once I realized that the strong and the sturdy were being sent to one side, and the young and the aged to the other. Hastily, I filled my shoes with dirt to gain a few centimeters in height. Swelling my chest, I even walked on my toes as I passed by him. I was sent with the sturdy. Later, we heard the shots, and I knew that my life had been given to me as a gift. Blessed be his name. The third time I was born, when 1,000 of us were taken to walk in front of soldiers on a battlefield. The area was full of mines, and we formed a living wall before the troops. Each and every day our number diminished as comrades, ripped apart, were left behind as food for the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field. 78 of us survived the march. I felt that our lives began anew when we finally reached the barn, where we were favored with our daily portion of thin soup. Blessed be the Lord each day. The fourth time, I was born later that night. I had left the barn for the yard behind it, where I managed to catch sight of a spark from a match and the sickening smile of the one who had lit it. Since the living wall had fulfilled its mission, it was no longer needed. The barn went up in flames, and all my comrades soared heavenward on the flaming pyre, a sacrificial offering ascending to God. May he be blessed.
Our next English reader, who will continue and conclude chapter 4, is Dr. Cheryl Rockman Greenberg, an Order of Canada recipient and a distinguished professor at the U of M in the Department of Biochemistry and Medical Genetics. Dr. Rockman Greenberg obtained her medical degree from McGill University in Montreal in 1974. She subsequently trained and was certified both in pediatrics and medical genetics. Her academic career as a clinical and metabolic geneticist began at Winnipeg's Children's Hospital and the Department of Pediatrics and Child Health at the University of Manitoba in 1979, where she has worked ever since. She is currently a clinical geneticist in the Program of Genetics and Metabolism, Shared Health, Manitoba WRHA, a clinician scientist in the Children's Hospital Research Institute of Manitoba, and distinguished professor in the departments of Pediatrics and Child Health and Biochemistry and Medical Genetics at the University of Manitoba. Over the course of her career, Dr. Rockman Greenberg has received numerous awards. In April 2018, she was inducted into the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. In the summer of 2018, she was inducted into the Order of Manitoba, and most recently, in December of 2019, she was appointed to the Order of Canada.
Thank you. Whoever has been born 4 times will not die only once. My death came to me after I had fled from the sight of the fire. I was captured by locals and forced into a boxcar on its way to the place where work makes one free. An orchestra greeted us, and all of us were led, holding soap and a towel to wash our sweat-covered bodies. The smell of flesh on fire confused our senses. The soap seemed to be burning in our hands, and the orchestra was playing. Thanks to God's mercies for me, I was removed from the line at the last moment and did not become part of the naked mass shoved into the room so savagely. The door slammed with a deafening noise, and from the room burst forth sounds that no words can adequately describe. The howling hiss of gas streaming in, accompanied by a mingling of faint and feeble cries, Shema Yisrael and Mamala, the Lord our God, and Madre Mia, the Lord is one, and Tatale, followed by a low, murmuring sound. Here my task began, to remove the bodies, to pull out gold teeth, to shove the dead into the oven. When I pulled out the teeth of my brother Lazar, whom I had not seen for years, my heart died within me. My body continued to live, but I became one of the walking dead. The Lord gave me life, and the Lord took it away. May the name of the Lord be blessed. How the Master of the universe has taken such trouble to ensure that we would not lose our faith in him. Yet in spite of his wrath and his rage, we have refused to succumb. When I die again, tear not your garments, mourn not, for there is no death after death. Do not even attempt to ask why. What I have not accomplished for myself, let others not try to accomplish on my behalf.
Thank you to our readers of Chapter 4 of Megillat Hashoah, Mr. Richard Yaffe and Dr. Cheryl Rockman-Greenberg. The reading of Chapter 5 of Megillat Hashoah begins with another selection chanted for us in Hebrew, with the special mournful melody of Echa, the scroll of lamentations read on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. The section will be chanted for us by Dr. Bonnie Cham, past president of Congregation Shered Zedek. Dr. Cham was a pediatric hematologist and oncologist at Cancer Care Manitoba and the Children's Hospital for 18 years. She currently serves as the medical director of clinical ethics at the Health Sciences Center. She's an associate professor at the Rady College of Medicine at U of M. In 2011, she was awarded the Dr. William Marsden Award in Medical Ethics by the Canadian Medical Association and is a former president of Congregation Shered Zedek.
בת קול משמיים מרחפת ואומרת, הלילה אני בוכייה, על הוריה של גרטרוד, שנקראו זה מזה בפירוט. הלילה אני בוכייה, על גרטרוד ואנושקה וגיטל, והלנה וגרציה, שכלה בוחן במחנות העבודה. על אלה אני בוכייה, על אנשי היהוד נראית, ועל הכפה היהודיה, שנדרשו למלא תפקיד, שאין אדם יכול למלא. על אלה אני בוכייה, על יעקב דוד בן יואל צבי הלוי, שמת פעמיים ונולד ארבע. על אלה אני בוכייה, על 922 חבריו, שעלו השמיימה בשדות המוקשים. על אלה אני בוכייה, על 77 ניצולים, שעפרם צבור במטבעים. Alleile ani vochia. Allezer shea b'mazvi'im shebachalamotav lo ra'a et achi oker et shimei hazahav mikufato Alleile ani vochia Alleile ani vochia le'al hamilyonim hadchukim b'getaot uv'machanot hama'avar al hamshotetim b'yarot ve'al hamustarim b'martefim uvakuchim al mi shematza miklat b'chektat acheret o ibed et Elohav al mi shenitan lenisuim bidei chayotarech sheshem rofei umadan nikra alehen al mi shemeit bara'av uvatzama nechnach lamavet ברכבת מסע או בתאי הגזים נורא מכפר חי או נשרף על מי שחוצה להורג בבליעה למען יראו ויראו על מקדשי שם שמיים ושם ישראל שסירבו להיכנע ונלחמו עד מוות על מי שאיבד את ביתו וכבודו ותקוותו על מי שנותר בחיים להיות את הזהב מחדש יום יום ורגע רגע על אלה אני בוכייה על הללים שלא למדו לחכות עמה על ילדים ילדות שנראיהם נגזלו מהם והם קמו טרם פריחה על עלמים ועל עמות שלא נתברכו מתחת לחופה על זקנים שלא זכו לשיבה של חסד על התזמורות ועל המוזיקה ועל כל יפי העולם שאהבת לו צבעוניותו וכולו רחום ואפור ושחור על כל אלה אני בוכייה.
Thank you to Dr. Bonnie Cham for that beautiful chanting of chapter 5 of the Megillat Hashoah. The English reading of chapter 5 will unfold in two sections. The first read for us in English by Reverend Peter Fast, the National Director with Bridges for Peace Canada. Between 2010 and 2013, Peter and his wife Deanna lived in Israel for 3 years, working as volunteers with Bridges for Peace. Peter holds degrees from Prairie College, a BA in Biblical Studies and a BA in Intercultural Studies. He has completed a Master of Arts in Judeo-Christian Studies at Masters International University of Divinity. Peter teaches on subjects such as Hebraic roots, historical and modern Israel, Christian anti-Semitism, and early church history. Peter is an accomplished author of 2 novels. Peter and Deanna have 2 children, Judah and Naomi, and live in Winnipeg, where the Canadian National Office of Bridges for Peace is located. Peter is a sought-after speaker. He and his wife frequently travel across the country, speaking to Christian and Jewish audiences in a variety of venues. As well, they make regular visits to Israel, whether leading discipleship tours, attending conferences, or participating in meetings as a member of Bridges for Peace's international senior leadership team.
A heavenly voice hovering cries out. A heavenly voice cries out, for these do I weep. For Gertrude's parents who were torn away from each other. For Gertrude and Anushka, Gittel, Helen, and Grazia, whose vitality came to an end in labor camps. For members of the Judenrat and for the Jewish capo who were asked to fulfill a task that no human being could fulfill. For Yaakov David ben Yoel Tzvi Halevi, who died twice and was born 4 times. For 922 comrades who from minefields ascended the heavens. For the 77 who were saved, whose dust was gathered in the barn. For Lazar, who in his most terrifying nightmares never saw his brother pulling gold teeth from his corpse. For these do I weep.
Before we continue with the rest of chapter 5, which will be read for us by Mr. Ryan Weens, a teacher at College Churchill, I'm told that very recently, Reverend Peter Fast and his wife Deanna welcomed a 3rd child into their family, a daughter, Meira Hannah. Now for the rest of chapter 5, again to be read for us by Mr. Ryan Weens, an educator, a teacher at College Churchill, and a member of the Baha'i community. It might be said that education is in Ryan's blood. He is the husband, brother, and son of teachers. Having grown up in Mennonite communities, Ryan chose as an adult to become a member of the Baha'i faith, what he sometimes calls Christian and ... He dedicates his class time to the pursuit of social justice education, which has included several years of participation in the Asper Foundation Human Rights and Holocaust Studies program. Ryan and his wife Melissa feel blessed every second to share their lives with their 2 teenage children and their dog.
For these do I weep, and for the millions crowded in ghettos and in detention camps, for those wandering in forests and those hidden in attics and in underground bunkers, for those who found refuge in the bosom of another faith or who lost their God, for those who were given over to experiments at the hands of wild beasts called doctors and scientists, for those who died of hunger and of thirst, smothered to death in freight trains or in gas chambers, shot, buried alive, or cremated, for those who were brought out to be killed by hanging so that they would be seen, and for those who sanctified God's name and the name of the people, Israel, refusing to be subdued, fighting to the death, for those who lost their homes, their dignity, and their hope, and for those left alive to live the horror anew, day after day, moment after moment. For these do I weep. For infants who never learned to say mommy. For boys and girls whose youth was stolen from them, who withered before coming to blossom. For young men and women who never were blessed beneath the wedding canopy. For the elderly denied the privilege of a gracious old age. For the orchestras and for the music. And for all the world's beauty whose rainbow of colors was lost, replaced by only brown and gray and black. For all these do I weep. I struggled so hard before the veiled curtain, before the merciful and gracious one of great kindness and truth. How I pled and how I begged, how I wanted to understand. Was all of this known on high? Was this the decree of God who is filled with compassion? This was the reward of such a nation? But there was no sound and no response, only an exasperating silence. The Most High abides in secret. God dwells in the shadow of silence. Deep, hidden, and awesome are the events. No one understands them, not even echoes of the heavenly voice.
Our thanks to our readers of chapter 5 of Megillat Hashoah, Reverend Peter Fast and Mr. Ryan Weens. Now for one more musical interlude. A powerful and again Yiddish song known by its opening words, Zog nit kenmol, sometimes referred to as the partisan lead, which will be performed for us this evening by Ariel Feuchel, senior cantor at Círculo Israelita de Santiago in Chile.
Nicht kein Mulas, du gehst dem Betzen weg. Chodschim im Bleiene, verstehim loyete. Im Bett noch unser Eus gewämmte Schau. Zweit ab heute unser Trott mir seinen da. Im Bett noch unser Eus gewämmte Schau. Zweit ab heute unser Trott mir seinen da. Mit Palmeland bis Weinland zu Schnee. Wir kommen mit unser Bein, mit unser Bein. Und wo gefallen ist ein Spritz von unser Blut, sprotzen Bett noch unser Gure, unser Blut. Und wo gefallen ist ein Spritz von unser Blut, sprotzen Bett noch unser Gure, unser Blut. Sag mit kein Lass du gehst dem Betzen weg, Chodschim im Bleiene verstehim loyete. Im Bett noch unser Eus gewämmte Schau, Zweit ab heute und unser Trott mit seinem da. Im Bett noch unser Eus gewämmte Schau, Zweit ab heute und unser Trott mit seinem da.
Our thanks to cantor Ariel Feuchel for that powerful rendition of Zog nit kenmol. Megillat Hashoah concludes with chapter 6, which will be read for us in English in two parts. The first, read for us by Mr. Joel Laser, the president of the Jewish Federation of Winnipeg. Joel began his Federation involvement 7 years ago when he was asked to join the Public Affairs and Advocacy Committee. From there, he became a member of the Federation Executive, assuming the role of president in December 2019. As a lifelong chartered accountant, Joel is a founding partner of Laser Grant, and until recently was its managing partner. He is currently the president of the firm's corporate finance division. Joel is a steadfast supporter of Israel, cares deeply about our community, and is a member of the national board of the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, CIJA. Joel resides in Winnipeg with his wife, Faye Vicker Laser.
Let there be light again. Again did the chronicler speak. At the edges of the night, the first rays of dawn could be discerned. They shone upon the remnants of human beings in striped clothing who stared at their surroundings with dead eyes. They have forgotten how to be happy, and their bodies reject any food offered them. Bulldozers thrust into gigantic pits thousands of thin, naked corpses that fall one atop the other, their limbs withered. In camps of the uprooted circled human streams, searching in despair for members of their families, and they were afraid to hope, lest their hope be lost. The unfortunates who tried to return to their homes found in them hostile neighbors from time to time, and more than once they were saved only by a miracle from murder following murder. People who did not know or who had sought not to know, who refused to believe or who forbade believing, stood with tearful eyes, not knowing where to direct their gaze or how to cleanse their conscience. Slowly, slowly, people returned to their homes, and family members were reunited. People married again, and children were born. Wave upon wave poured into the East, and the state of Israel arose, and centers of Jewish life flourished throughout the world.
And for the final section of Megillat Hashoah in English, we welcome Reverend Megan Roburn from the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Winnipeg. Reverend Roburn was called to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Winnipeg in 2017. She also serves as vice president for the Unitarian Universalist Ministers of Canada. She received her Master of Divinity degree from the Claremont School of Theology, an intentionally multi-faith, multicultural seminary. While her family hails from Halifax, she has fallen in love with the Manitoba prairies. In addition to being a minister, she is also a co-parent to 2 kids, a partner to her spouse, a gamer, and a back-of-the-pack runner. Before she finally followed her lifelong call to ministry, she worked in the music industry, the film and television business, and the nonprofit sector. As a Unitarian Universalist, she ministers to all, regardless of assigned sex, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, romantic orientation, skin color, size, physical ability, and cognitive ability.
Trains traveled to resorts once again, and orchestras were making joyous music in all corners of the land. Perhaps this is the way in which heaven sought some consolation for those who suffered and mourned. The heroism of courageous resistors was revealed and proclaimed, and mourners' Kaddish was recited for the dead. Memorial books were written. Monuments were erected so that finally mourners could find a place where they could weep for their dead. Criminals were punished, and those who were afflicted in body or soul received help. Nevertheless, it was impossible to restrain the angel of dreams, who continues to terrify the rescued night after night. Impossible to silence the gnawing voice of conscience, which demands an explanation for satanic evil and for apathetic hearts. Such questions: why, God, why? Why us? Why them? Why now? Why in that way? Are left suspended in midair, hovering over all human deeds, and there is no response. time will tell what we have learned. Only time will reveal whether we truly have listened to the voice of the blood of the slaughtered crying out from the earth. Do not mourn too much, but do not sink into the forgetfulness of apathy. Do not allow days of darkness to return. Weep, but wipe the tears away. Do not absolve and do not exonerate. Do not attempt to understand. Learn to live without an answer. Through our blood, live.
Our thanks to all our readers this evening in both Hebrew and English of Megillat Hashoah. Rabbi Yosef Ben Arush, Mr. Kevin Chief, Reverend Julie Collings, Mr. Bob Silver, Mr. Rob Berkowitz, Rabbi Alan Finkel, Sensei Tanis Moore, Dr. Rachel Reeser-Taylor, Mr. Richard Yaffe, Dr. Cheryl Rockman-Greenberg, Dr. Bonnie Cham, Reverend Peter Fast, Mr. Ryan Weens, Mr. Joel Laser, and Reverend Megan Roburn. To all of you, we say Yasher Koach. May you go from strength to strength. More power to you. In closing our program and our service this evening, we turn to two selections from Jewish liturgy. The first is the El Malei Rachamim, the memorial prayer, which will be recited for us by Rabbi Anibal Mas of Congregation Shered Zedek, recorded earlier this afternoon on Yom HaShoah at the Shered Zedek Cemetery in front of the General Monash Memorial.
במעלות קדושים, קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע המאזינים, עדן שמות, עדן שמות, כל הכלי בני ישראל, שנטבחו בשואה, אנשים, נשים וטף, שנחנקו ושנשרפו ושנהרגו, שמשו את נפשם על קידוש השם, וגן עדן תהי מנוחתם. אבל רחמים הסדיני בסדר קנא לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים, החיים את נתנותיהם, אדוני נחלה וידעו בשלום על משכבותיכם ונאמר
Yasher Koach to Rabbi Mas. Jarniewski, the Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada, who is holding for us the special Holocaust Torah scroll we use at Congregation Shered Zedek to mark these most solemn occasions. A Torah scroll that was rescued from the Shoah and a synagogue in Czech Republic and is on permanent loan to us thanks to the generosity and arrangement with a museum in London, England. The second and concluding piece of Jewish liturgy we offer this evening is the Kaddish Yatom, the Mourner's Kaddish. If you are not already standing for the El Male Rachamim, we invite you to stand with us for the Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divra chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'gala uv'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'alam u'lamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh v'yithadar, v'yitale v'yitalal, shemei dekudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who creates peace and harmony on high bring peace and harmony to us, to all Israel, to all of humanity. And again, let us say, Amen. You may be seated. An evening like this could not happen without the incredible work of a number of people whom I would like to thank personally for the hours they've put in to making this a seamless, first time ever virtual event. The organizational skills of our lay clergy colleague and shamus Bill Wiseman from Congregation Shered Zedek, who was involved year after year with Megillat Hashoah, his meticulous attention to detail, his organization of all of the readers, and everything to make personally my life so smooth for this service. Bill, thank you so much. As well to Bel Jarniewski, who has been with us every step of the way throughout the years of this annual event, and also for her incredible remarks to begin our evening. The Executive Director of the Jewish Heritage Center of Western Canada. Thanks to the rest of our ritual team here from Congregation Shered Zedek, who played invaluable roles in this evening's service. Leslie Emery, Rabbi Anibal Mas, and as well Marvin Polanski, our audio-visual director, from holding the scroll so people could see what we read, to editing all the videos and including the English translations so you could follow along with ease and understanding, to making sure every camera was in the right place, every mic turned on so we could sound and look our best for you. Thanks to Leslie, Rabbi Mas, and Marvin. Thank you again to all of our readers, and thank you especially to all of you, our viewers, our congregation this evening. May we get to be a congregation in person next year when we relive and retell this very powerful story. Until then, thank you for helping us to remember. Thank you for helping us to commemorate. And may we all live by the last word of the scroll, Chayu, live. Stay safe, stay well. We'll see you next time. Thank you.